going to take a moment then to invite our guests up and make introductions. Y'all come up and join us. Yeah. So we have two sitting state house representatives and two statewide strategists who have been doing this work far longer than I have on varying levels. I think Kenney could write a 5-volume book at this point. But they're coming around the county, the state right now, talking to folks about how South Carolina Democrats can fight and win.
Hey everyone, I'm Kenney. Really appreciate you having us out this evening. And I was going to set the table with a little introduction, but Catherine's done such a great job kind of introducing why we're here. This panel and this conversation that we want to have with y'all tonight, in some respects flows from obviously the national conversation about the shellacking that and the loss in 2024, and there's many conversations have been had about how the country could vote for a criminal insurrectionist over a really nice lady who served her country and apparently is a really good cook. But that's what happened. That is not the purpose of our conversation tonight. By my estimation, we have the smallest number of Democrats in the South Carolina State House since 1872, I believe. I think it's fair to say if you're here listening to a talk about the comeback in South Carolina, you have already sort of table stakes that you accept the proposition that we're moving in the wrong direction and need to make a change. And so I think the question is, how do we do that, and where can we start? So let me sort of begin with where we started this afternoon. We were with some folks in Greenville, and I want to start with Representative Bauer. Representative Bauer, you were the only Democrat in 2022 to flip a seat from red to blue, defeated a 10-year incumbent, well-funded, focusing principally, exclusively on the issue of abortion. Would you give these folks just a brief overview of that race and your strategy in that race?
Sure. Thank you again for having us. So in 22, I had no plan of running again. I had already run 2 elections, had been running campaigns for 3 years straight. And so when I realized that no one was going to file to run against the incumbent, I said, listen, if no one files to run against him, the day filing closes, I will go at 11:30 and file to run. But if I do, I'm only going to talk about abortion. Roe v. Wade was in the Supreme Court. So the court was stacked. We kind of saw the writing on the wall of what was going to happen. And so I said, this would be my predominant message. It just so turned out we went back to the special session in the House that fall for the full abortion ban, which we're going to see very soon again. And he took a few bad votes on that bill that was in the House. Actually, amendments put up by Spencer Wetmore down in Charleston. And with that, Chris and I, he called me. I was like, listen, this is it. Let's go after him. So we won and ran solely on abortion. I talked to most of the Republicans at the front door at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and I said, hey, you have your first cup of coffee, but did you know that Kirk and Philly voted to ban abortion? And they're like, no, I had no idea. These are avid voters in the district, and they had no idea. So it took a ton of voter education, knocking thousands and thousands of doors. But we kind of snuck up on them, and we beat them, and we were the only ones to flip the seat that year.
So, and I want to transition in a minute to talk about the State House and focus on a little bit about what it means to be in the opposition right now. But Heather, let's stick with you. Your campaign, your television ads, your mail, your digital, your door knocks, your door hangers, everything communicated one idea.
It was abortion. That's all we talked about.
Kirkman Finley voted to ban abortion.
It was not about me. The election was not about me. They didn't even know who the hell I was. They just knew that Kirkman Finley was bad, and he did not believe in women and freedom. And so we hit that home every single day on the doors, on phones and text messages on TV and mailers. So by the end of it, people were like, okay, Heather, can you please stop? I'm like, good, we've gotten to the sweet spot where people know what he really believes. And that was the purpose, that's the purpose of a good campaign. By the end of it, people had heard it so many times that we convinced enough people to go out and vote against them.
So you win by 250 votes.
250 votes.
250 votes. You take the oath and you go serve in January. When did you start serving?
23.
23, okay. Talk to us about, you're there, you're elected on the issue of abortion. The abortion bill comes back to the General Assembly. Talk to us about what that floor fight's like.
Sure. So we had, sorry. So we had the sister senators who fought a total ban in the Senate, remember, right? Well, there was a separate bill that was in the House, when it came to the House. And our thinking was that we just beat a 10-year Republican in a really tough race on abortion only, that I would walk into the chamber and we would feel very compelled as a party to be like, listen, you take our rights, we're gonna take your seat, right? So the abortion is in the House, and we had an idea to bog down the House and really fight for every minute of healthcare. But we filed close to 1,000 amendments. You remember us walking into the chamber with all those boxes of amendments? You might have seen it. But we took them up, we walked them up there to prove a point, right? But what I was met with as a freshman, this is my first year in session, I barely know the rules. And I'm having people in my own party wanting to me to pull amendments because we're upsetting the Republicans in the House.
No, let me just interject.
Yeah, go ahead.
They didn't disagree. They believe what we believe on abortion.
They didn't like the bill, of course, but
They were voting against the
they
bill.
were voting against the bill.
But they want you to pull the amendments.
Yeah, because it's uncomfortable, right? And I don't know what they got from that, but I was like, well, I'm not leaving the chamber. I refuse to pull any amendments. So, I'm not going to do that. So either with me or not, we're going to fight for healthcare, we're going to prove a point, and make them eat their words, right? And suffer through this and hear all the testimony and hear us talk about it on every single amendment. But I was told, we're going to take our funding, and like, go ahead. Wouldn't that make for a great story? Republican GOP pulls all Democratic funding from the House. I'll start with a funding account, whatever. But that's how it went down. It was very disheartening going through that. And I was a freshman kind of leading a filibuster in the House completely alone, not knowing all the rules. I learned really fast. But I think we made a good point and we ended up losing. But what that shows we're fighting for you.
As the great-grandson of sharecroppers from rural Sumter, South Carolina, I learned at an early age the value and the importance of education. My great-grandparents didn't go any further than the 6th or 7th grade. But what they did do was they instilled into my grandmother and my granddad, who were the first generation of college students in our family, they taught them just how important a good education is. Those same values were passed down to my mother, who then passed those values down to my brother and sister and I. So knowing the importance of a good education, ensuring that every child in our state has access to a high-quality education, not simply a minimally adequate education, which is what our state constitution provides for. Fighting for that is really, really important to me. Let me say this. Vouchers, sending money to private schools, as Democrats, we all know that's a bad thing. A few minutes ago, you all heard me talk about my experience with public education as both a student and as both somebody who knows how important it is. And Chris, as you all heard mentioned a few minutes ago, historically, Democrats have been known as the party in this state for public education. A couple years ago, Jim Rex was, more than a couple, almost 20 years ago, Jim Rex was the only Democrat to win a statewide election as superintendent of education on the issue of education. So people trust us as a party. They trust us to speak with authority and to dictate what happens. What we have seen happen over the past several years is we have seen that erode, that trust erode. And now what we see where people once believed that the Democratic Party had the right ideas about education. We now see movements from Moms for Liberty and other groups that are taking over our school boards and that are pushing an agenda. Now, as we talk about strategy, I think as Democrats, as we move forward with having these kind of conversations, our strategy has to be strong. And I think with the voucher bill, it was assumed that we would just kind of fight the fight. But at the end of the day, we really needed to go in there with, full speed ahead. And sometimes I think when we're in a super minority, what happens is that it's easy to sometimes say, okay, well, we already know how this is going to end, right? There are 36 Democrats and 88 Republicans. But I think even knowing that we're not going to win the fight as Democrats, we must have the willpower, we must have the fortitude to say, although we won't win, but we're still going to fight. And I think that's going to be really important and really key for us as Democrats in order to be able to continue to amplify just how bad Republican leadership is, and it will take strategy to do that.
The tension I see here is a sort of assumption of regularness inside the General Assembly. As the opposition party, am I misreading that, or do we need to sort of change gears?
So Kambrell didn't give himself the credit. On the voucher debate, at least this session, as a caucus, we meet weekly during session. And like, how do y'all meet? Come up with a plan. Like, what's the plan? And I will say this. Before that debate, I barely called the debate at all. Kambrell kind of held the floor for as long as he could. But we had maybe a 10-minute closed session to actually discuss any kind of strategy, and then we packed up our things and walked over to the State House, and then it was on, and that was it. So what we saw from Kambrell was, because he truly believes in public education, and everything he said is 100% accurate, but there was no strategy. The same way with the abortion stuff, they did not want me to do that, and I say them, a lot of my colleagues. So there's a lot of pushback wanting to push the status quo. It can be uncomfortable. Have I been given a lot of hate for some of the work I've done? 100%. Do I regret any of it? Absolutely not. Because people want to see that we're fighting for them. And I think we can do a lot better to show we're fighting.
Representative Garvin, are we practicing regular politics at irregular times?
I think if you look at the national landscape of Democrats, or whether it be South Carolina Democrats in Columbia, or whether it be Democrats in Washington, D.C., I think that we have to adjust how we approach the situation. And Democrats have historically been the party that has been here, and the Republican Party has demonstrated that they don't mind going here. And so until we start fighting back and fighting fire with fire, then we're going to continue to get the kind of results that we get. In South Carolina, it is a little bit more difficult, just simply because there are 36 of us to 88. And it does make it very, very difficult to get really, really positive things done. So you can have a lot of positive bills that will benefit your community, but when you get to the General Assembly, if there's a D behind your name, then oftentimes those bills fall by the wayside. But what I will say is that there has been one member of our General Assembly and one member of our caucus that has been very, very effective, passing, I think, 3 to 5 pieces of bills over the past couple of years. That's a Democratic member who was recently named National Legislator of the Year, and she's here tonight, and that's Representative Robin Harrison Myers. So give that that you all have a very good who makes it out here, fighting on their behalf, and it's truly an honor and privilege to serve with her.
So, Brady, Quirk, Garvin, you help candidates, you help elect candidates, and you were the chair of the Charleston County Party when y'all ran every Republican out of the county. This state house game that we've been talking about, does that matter in terms of the nuts and bolts of electing candidates? And if it does, how so?
Sure, it absolutely matters. And one thing I just want to say, just because Chris said that I'm from Charleston. One thing that I hear now is, oh, you're from Charleston. It's totally different than Spartanburg, right? Charleston's this liberal blue city. So I just want to do a little, again, sometimes our memory can be short. When I arrived in Charleston, how many countywide seats did Democrats hold in Charleston? 0, not a 1. And now we have 7 out of 8. We're going to pick up the next one next year. But things change, right? This is the good news of tonight. The good word is that things change. And so what I want to say to you here in Spartanburg is that while things may be challenging as a party today, that does not mean they'll be challenging in 5 years or 10 years.
That's right.
It's not going to change overnight. It took some time, took a lot of effort, took great people like Catherine having a different mindset about how a party would operate. But what I would say, Chris, to you is that what happens in Columbia matters. For the reason that you were hinting on a little bit, is that I think in these times, and I would say sort of a post-COVID era of politics, people are angry. They're upset. And what they want, Representative Garvin was talking about, we need to fight a little differently. I think people just want to know that you're fighting and trying to do something. As insane as it sounds, because I think all of us here in this room, right, we're in a little bit of a bubble. We get it. We were going to vote for Kambrell no matter what. But there are some people that truly voted for Donald Trump or vote for Republicans just if they say he's doing something. Now, it may be tearing down every institution that we care about, ruining people's lives, but they say he's doing something. And one of the things that I think we need to do as a party, and I think both these state representatives do and yours here, is show people that we're doing something. That act of putting up a fight, even if it fails, even if the abortion ban passed, even if the voucher bill passed, you're standing up and saying, I see you, I hear you, I'm going to be with you. And that brings people to say, oh, that's the party I want to be with, that's the candidate that I want to be with. So I think what happens in Columbia at the State House matters a lot, because what I think people are looking for is a fighter, and I mean that on the candidate level, on the party level, and so that'd be what I'd say.
So Brady, stay with you for a second. So like on this issue of like, how do we build a party that is in opposition to what is happening with Republicans in Columbia? But what does that look like to you? Like what are the necessary ingredients for that opposition, right? To have those fights and then use those fights to build.
Sure, so I think there's sort of 2 ways to approach this. One is, and I say this with all love to my fellow Democrats, we have to stop being enamored with the shiny new object. That would be a presidential race, a big federal race, and get real focused on local races. Catherine talked about this, but when I became chair in Charleston, I said, you know what we're going to do, guys? And they said, we're going to turn the state blue. I said, no, we're going to win the treasurer's seat for Charleston County. And county party, we were talking, they looked at me, they're like, who the hell cares who the treasurer is? What, and what I said, and what bore out to be true and has been proven in other places as well, is wins beget more wins. And we looked at the numbers and we said, the treasurer in Charleston had just, lost like $1 million because they're really bad at counting as Republicans. And we said, we're going to go after him. We're going to flip that. And we ran a great guy who, and I mean this with all of him, looks like, an auditor, a guy you trust with your money, Peter Tecklenburg. He went in there and he won. And all of a sudden people said, oh my gosh, Democrats can win countywide. They don't just win in the city, they can win countywide. And all of a sudden we had more people signing up to run the next year. We had more volunteers coming out to canvass. We had more people giving money. The other part that, Chris, I think when you're an opposition party, let's be clear, that is where we are, is that there can be 40 things we want to talk about, right? We want to talk about what's happening out of the White House. We want to talk about what's happening in Columbia. We want to talk about 15 issues that we care about. And everyone in this room, we're in that bubble, right? We're reading the news all the time. We're keeping up with what's happening. Your average voter is not. Your average voter is taking their kid to soccer or putting food on the table or trying to figure out after the kid goes to bed how to pay bills. And so what Heather talked about, and it bore out in her case too, is you need to pick one issue. When you're the opposition party, it can be tempting to just say, let's just yell about everything Donald Trump is doing. And that's just too distracting for people. We need to pick a single issue and just hammer hammer it home, and that's whether you're a candidate or a party. So I think when you're in the opposition, finding one or two issues that you can just hammer on until people are sick of hearing about it, that's when you know you've broken through and you'll see the votes.
Let me push back on that for a second. So, in the candidate space, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Right? Heather Bauer in 2022 has limited money, limited time. If voters can only know one thing before they go to the polls, what do we want them to know? We want them to know that Quirk and Finley voted to ban abortion, right? Like, that's it. That's all you have time for. Once you're elected and you're in the state house and you've got abortion bills, you've got voucher bills, you've got tax bills, you've got a number of issues, right? Guns, I mean, you name it, you've got a multitude of issues. What should we be doing with that?
So I would say two things. One, it's important that the people that we do elect are fighters like Representative Garvin who can say to their constituents, you elected me because I'm an educator and I'm fighting this voucher bill. And so that's on the candidate or elected side. But as a party, the other thing that I think we need to do is be focusing our attention. And Catherine and the whole team here is doing a good job of that, of saying, again, as a party too, we have limited resources. So where are we going to put it where we can flip one seat, right? Sometimes we get lofty goals, and I love that. That's what makes us aspirational Democrats. And, you know, I am all about that we're going to win every state in the country someday. But back on earth, back in reality, what we can do here in Spartanburg is flip one seat, and that's going to double the number of people in this room.
That's right.
And the next year after that, you're going to win 2 seats, and all of a sudden you're going to need a new space to meet in. That's how we need to approach this, as a very granular building block basis.
So, Representative Garvin, let me come to you for a second. You ran for minority leader last session, okay. Lost by a couple of votes. What does a leader Garvin look like in the next General Assembly in terms of a strategy to find opportunities? Maybe it's to drive a wedge. Maybe it's to create an accountability opportunity so that we can elect the next Heather Bauer on some other issue. Like, what, in your view, like, what does leadership look like when you've got 36 members out of 124 in the House?
Absolutely. So let me say this. As you all can tell, my colleague, Rep. Bauer, is very, very pregnant, and she's having a baby soon. I have a 4-year-old at home. Brady has a family. Chris has obligations. I have a dog. So I say that to simply say that we're here tonight to talk about how we can move forward as a party. How can we move forward? How can we be effective as Democrats at the State House? How can we get good things done for the people that send us to the State House? I think, to Chris's question, I think what has to happen, whether it be whomever is at the helm of either of the Democratic caucuses, whether it be on the House side or on the Senate side, there has to be a game plan. There has to be, I think members need to be in unison on what the key issues are that are most important to us as Democrats. Let me tell you, I've been now in January, I'll be starting my 8th year. And I can't believe that it's 8 years. I can't believe it's been that long. And what I've noticed in those 8 years, and I'm sure Representative Myers will probably agree with this, is that when we first came in, there was not a Freedom Caucus. Okay, there was not the intra-Republican Party fighting that we now see. But over the past 3 or 4 years, what we have seen is we've seen that party fracture. So now you have a hard right versus quote-unquote more mainstream Republicans that are now fighting one another. What has happened is it has allowed the Dems to now become the third party. And then the fights are becoming less and less about Democratic versus Republican, and now they're becoming more Republican versus a Republican. So what we have to do, I think, moving forward, whomever is at the helm of leadership, is say, as Democrats, we need to be pushing our values and amplifying our values to the highest degree. And we can't just let the Republicans fight one another. While it is entertaining, to sit there and watch them fight each other. It is a thing, but we still have to, at the end of the day, get out there and say, this is what we believe in as a party. This is why it's important to be a Democrat. And on the last point, we have to show folks that it's okay to be a Democrat, okay? We can't just be a party of the coast or of the big cities or of one community or another. We have to, once again, get back to our roots as a big tent party. And when you're a big tent party, everybody's not going to agree, okay? There are going to be people that are, that have different perspectives on abortion, people that have different perspectives on a lot of different issues. But we have to be able to bring folks together to say, as Democrats, that we're willing to fight, and as Democrats, that we're not going to accept the status quo, and that tomorrow can be brighter than today. Because if we don't fight for a brighter future as Democrats, who will?
That's right. I just really quickly from all three of you, does everybody agree that where the energy is in the country is not so much on the ideological spectrum for a candidate, but it's for somebody who's willing to get caught fighting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are in a moment, an era, and where people are looking for a fighter, full stop.
So, to Representative Garvin's point about not always agreeing, one thing that I find interesting, and Representative Bauer talked to us about this a little bit, you did put at least one Republican scalp on the list, two, I guess, right? Finley, and talk about the comptroller, and talk about the treasurer, and then talk about sometimes pursuing accountability in our own party when the community is demanding.
Yeah, so GOP claims to be fiscally responsible, good with money, right? We did not do true. The Comptroller General lost like $3.5 billion 2 years ago. Oops. I spearheaded that fight in the House, and during the budget session, I passed a proviso to lower his salary to $1. He resigned the next week. Okay. So it's little opportunities like that showed, and I had no majority vote in the House. Fast forward, the treasurer, Chris Locke, is the bug guy. He lost $1.8 billion, $5 million, something like that. Can't count, he's a treasurer. He needs to go too. In the Senate, there's a full investigation happening. He's under oath on the Senate chamber, explaining why he cooked the books for 10 years or more. And in the House, I thought our was.
Let me just interject. Those are Republicans in the Senate investigating.
Yes, Republicans are leading that effort in the Senate. Of course, Democrats agree with it, but these are Republicans leading this effort, Goldfinch and others in the Senate, holding him accountable, thinking clearly the House is going to do something because this is really bad, right? He clearly can't do his job. He's derelict in his duties. So I filed articles of impeachment. I held a press conference, and it's not too late. My colleagues in here, but as far as I've looked, I don't have any co-sponsors on that bill. So opportunities like that is what I think our caucus should be focusing on. Because if I did something for far less, or any of us in our day job, we would have lost our jobs, right? So we need to hold him accountable. There's no reason. So picking fights like that, why can't we have a Democratic treasurer? You know, to have those issues, to bring those to light, to be in the press, to hold them responsible, creates an opportunity for other Democrats to run.
So let's pull back just a little bit.
Oh, let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't answer your second question about, yes, as far as my own party, my title is representative, right? So I take that very literally. I go to community meetings, I have constituent meetings, I knock a lot of doors, as Catherine has mentioned. So I find my job very simple if I just show up and listen. And I work on what my constituents ask me to do. And since the day I was elected, it was a lot of infrastructure issues, and it was a lot of school board issues in my district. And so I made it very vocal, and I made it very public that we have a failing school district where 40% of our kids are not military, college, or career ready. That's not okay. In the capital city, that school district who's failing is not okay with me. So I took them to task, and I think I was greatly rewarded by my constituents this past election cycle, because they were happy I was trying to do something, and standing up for teachers and standing up for the cafeteria workers and people who clean the schools, the rat droppings that were in the classrooms, you name it. I was able to help with that. So, and was it popular with everybody? Absolutely not. Did my constituents happy with the work I did? Absolutely.
So, to this point about the landscape, let's pull back for a second. When I think about like South Carolina and particularly how Democrats got into this situation, it's a much longer story. We're happy to come back and really get nerdy in the weeds with y'all another night. But the short version is that our legislative districts have been gerrymandered in a way that has separated us largely along racial lines. And after that separation occurred, we had a U.S. Supreme Court that started dismantling the Voting Rights Act, and then gave Republicans the perfect legal defense, which is, hey, we weren't engaging in racial gerrymandering, we were engaging in political gerrymandering. And so that 30-year process, operating as a one-way ratchet, and now to lock in those gains, to me explains a lot of how we got to this point. But I think it's important that it doesn't explain the whole story. I'd be interested to hear each of y'all, and maybe Brady, let's start with you, to talk a little bit about how you see the landscape writ large in South Carolina. We are a state with tremendous demographic change that's underway. And there has been, frankly, a really troubling reduction in the participation of black voters compared to their white counterparts. The short version of this is, in 2022, black voters went to the polls at a rate 15 points less than their white counterparts, and then we saw that repeated in 2024. And so, that's a really troubling trend. And we do have a state where there's a lot of changing demographic pressures, including in this county. How do you think of the landscape, and how do you think of the landscape in terms of challenges and opportunities for our candidates?
Sure. So one of the things, just to reset, because Chris thinks about this a lot more as a lawyer than I think most of us do, but come 2030, we will draw new district lines. We'll go through redistricting again. And one of the things that I think about that's really important, as Chris alluded to, is the courts have basically allowed now gerrymandering to be legal. And that sucks. There's no way around it. That's just bad policy. What will make that better, what will make that more tenable, what will make better districts is if we have folks in elected office who are hungry for that fight, right? And so one of the things that I think is important is having folks like these two on stage who are ready to, when we go into a redistricting battle, to draw lines that aren't just first going to look out to protect Heather's seat. She's not going to draw more Democrats into her seat so she doesn't have to work so hard. She's going to work really hard to maybe make sure that we can pick up another Democratic seat. And so I think one of the things that I think about as we go into 26, 28, 2030 is that we need to elect folks who are really hungry for that redistricting fight. Because really, if we can't win on redistricting, we're going to lose a lot more battles. And so I think one of the things, and it's true down on the coast where I am, it's certainly true here in the upstate, but we are seeing exponential population growth. And just to run that forward, what that means is when they redraw the lines in 2030, there will be fewer seats, not in Columbia, but sort of the middle part of the state, and there will be a lot more, there will be new seats created in the upstate and along the coast. And so what that means, the opportunity is, we want elected officials that are going to draw those lines so that we can pick up Democratic seats up here in the upstate, but also we need county parties that haven't let their muscle atrophy. We need county parties that, when we get those new lines in 2030, are like, we know how to knock doors. We've been knocking thousands of doors since 2005, or 2025, we need county parties who are making those phone calls so that they're ready to seize on that opportunity. Because again, unless something dramatically changes, come 2030, those new districts will be here in your county and on the coast. And we need to be prepared to meet that moment.
So yeah, Representative Garvin's the only person on the stage who's actually been in the legislature during a redistricting. Talk about that process, and it came up at lunch today with a former colleague former House member. She said, folks need to understand that Democrats often are complicit in the gerrymander because it creates protection for incumbents. It's an incumbent protection plan. Representative Garvin, talk about the last redraw and what we could do better on the next one.
Absolutely. I'm going to answer that question, but before I answer it, let me start off by saying it's important to understand some of the historical landscape that we face. So at the end of the Civil War, here in South Carolina, African Americans made up a majority of our state's General Assembly. We were the only state in the Union that had a majority African American legislature, okay, senators and House members. For about 10 years or so, these folks did an excellent job. They brought about public education, they fought for access to health care, they really worked hard to make life better for all South Carolinians. It didn't matter if you're white, if you're black, they just wanted the world and the state to be better for everybody, okay? As you all, for anybody else who's a student of history, maybe know what happened. The end of the Reconstruction era ended, and these folks were literally, these lawmakers were literally round town, ran out of the state, and it will be nearly another 100 years before we begin to elect African American members to our state's General Assembly, as well as to our congressional delegation. Jim Clyburn, of course, African American, elected in 1992. Ida Quincy Newman, first African American elected to the state Senate in 1985. Why is that important? It's important because we need to know how history dictates our future and where we're going. What we see happening all over the nation, let's look at Texas. We see a move by Republican legislators to draw out Democratic members of Congress to give Donald Trump a 5-seat majority in Congress. So what they have done is they have drawn out some of these districts and they've squeezed and they have diluted the power of the minority vote. Whether it be African Americans or Hispanic voters, their vote is now far less valuable than their white counterparts. That's unacceptable. Unacceptable. There have been calls from some of our colleagues here in South Carolina for our General Assembly to do the very same thing in drawing out Congressman Clyburn, giving the Republican Party 7 out of the 7 seats that we now, our congressional seats that we now occupy. That is unacceptable, okay? It is unacceptable. But what I would say, as having gone through the redistricting process, it is true. Incumbents certainly are going to draw districts that they believe they can win in, for one. And Republicans have been happy to draw as many minority districts as possible because they dilute that community's influence in other districts that could be winnable. Heather Bauer was a great example. As her district has changed, she was able to bring in a large coalition of votes. But had she not had some of those minority voters, then the outcome might have been a whole lot different. I know it's a pretty small population, but that population could have made a difference between those 200 or so votes that she won by. So it's really important that we look at it holistically. And our Supreme Court has just given the General Assemblies all over the country the autonomy to do whatever they want to do, and that is unacceptable. And we're going to be seeing a reversal of a lot of progress that we've made over the past 100 or so years.
So in a rare moment of perhaps disagreement tonight, I will say I am more confident that that Republicans will not redraw the congressional districts in South Carolina for the simple reason that if you cracked the 6th congressional district, you would elect at least one more Democrat. That's my view. And so I think they know that they have maxed out the plan here in South Carolina to the greatest extent they're going to be able to. I'm not super concerned that they will attempt to do that.
And I hope Chris is right. I do, because they have drawn a district that is favorable to a Democrat win. And this reminds me of a point, Chris. Back in 2022, I actually went, a handful of Democrats were actually called to testify in the NAACP and Alexander lawsuit versus the state of South Carolina, which challenged the congressional map. So for those who have been following it, you know that the first congressional district was drawn in such a way that cut out minority voters and put them into the 6th congressional district. To Chris's point, to ensure that Nancy Mace or any other Republican could win that seat after Joe Cunningham flipped the seat. So I could see that. But Chris, there are colleagues that are telling you that they are pushing hard to figure out a way to get another seat. That Donald Trump tells them to do it. We have seen that he says, do it, they're going to do it.
Real quick at this point, and then I want to move on to some rapid fire questions, and then more importantly, y'all's questions. To Representative Garvin and Bauer, do either of y'all believe that we can elect Democrats or convince your colleagues to fight for a reapportionment plan, a redistricting plan, that perhaps puts them in a little more political jeopardy, but creates more opportunity for Democrats writ large? Is that possible?
Democrats have introduced an independent committee multiple times. And we signed on to it, we supported it, and of course we know that that's not going to go anywhere, an independent committee. However, what we've seen in California is they have that same sort of committee, and now they're trying to do away with it to match Donald Trump's gerrymandering. So I think the question is, are Democrats going to continue to fight these lofty fights, or are Democrats now going to kind of fight the way Republicans are fighting? And that's the question I think as a party that we have to ask ourselves.
And I would just say I hope so, because competition has made me a better legislator. I went through a really tough primary in 2020, ran for city council, then ran again in 22, then ran another election in 24. In the competition, being a really tight district has really made me a better legislator, and has forced me to show up and act upon my constituents' best interests.
And one quick point, Chris.
Yes, please.
Democrats make up 40% of the electorate. However, we occupy like 15% of the General Assembly. So there's some clear disparity. We got 40% of the electorate and only 15% of the actual seats in the General Assembly. That's a problem.
Okay, so we went maybe deeper than I intended on redistricting, but let's do some fun stuff and then see. Does somebody gonna help us with questions? Okay, all right. Let's do some fun stuff because everybody deserves candy. Okay, so real quick, these are rapid fire, short answer, one sentence, one word. Okay, here we go. The issue that made you realize you were a Democrat, Representative Bauer.
Abortion.
Pay equity.
Freedom.
Good deal. Okay, the Republican most likely to win the 2026 nomination for governor.
I hate to say this, really good at getting attention, Nancy Mace.
Listen to the groans out there.
Sorry, gotta get attention.
I'm gonna have nightmares now tonight thinking about that answer. But I was gonna say Alan Wilson, who's not much better, but it doesn't keep me up at night.
I'm just going to pass this on.
I'm going to weigh in. I agree with Bauer. She understands the attention economy. Okay, here we go. Your favorite South Carolina Republican scandal to watch?
RJ May.
This treasurer losing $1 billion and seeming like no one cared.
There was a rapid fire. I'll say RJ May as well.
Okay. The Trump policy that has you most concerned about the future of the country?
Immigration for sure, or taking over cities.
Attacks on fundamental institutions like voting.
Second, freedom.
All right. To that point, who is the Democrat, national Democrat, doing the best job holding the line against the administration right now? Let's make Representative Garvin go first on this one. He's getting to come along.
Oh, I have this answer, and I would definitely say it's Gavin Newsom. Or Gavin Newsom.
Gavin Newsom. I would say, honestly, like, not many electeds. A lot of people on social media I'm seeing doing a great job. Not sure I know who the elected would be.
Wow.
I tend to agree with you. I think Gavin is absolutely hilarious, and he's making a mockery of Trump. Whether he can be the president, I don't know.
Okay, we'll end on a somewhat optimistic note, and let me just say this. We're doing this all over the state. We really appreciate y'all having us. We look forward to your questions. The purpose in us doing this is to try to, one, share a little bit of insight about what's going on, and maybe encourage folks to do something about it. Maybe it's knocking doors, making phone calls. Maybe it's running for office and putting yourself out there. But what is one thing everybody in this room can do to change the direction of the party for the better? Yes, sir.
I'll start us off. First of all, let's say thank you all for coming out tonight. And I want to challenge each of you all to not give up. Okay? So, I live in Columbia, Bauer lives in Columbia. I live in Blackwood, but right outside of Columbia. And it's a little bit of a different kind of commitment for me and for her to serve because we're local. We get to go home every night to see our families, or we get to, go to our church events and our sporting events. But there are people that travel from all over the state that come to Columbia every week. Sometimes they drive back and forth 3 times a week to represent you and your values and your interests. And sometimes being in the minority party where there are only 36 Democrats to 124 members, it's easy to get discouraged. And I think about those members sometimes because they continue to show up and many of them continue to fight hard for the things that we believe in. So I want to encourage you all, do that, have that same energy. Continue to serve, continue to fight. Let's flip county council seats. Let's flip city council seats. Let's show South Carolina that Democrats can govern, that Democrats have good ideas, and that Democrats are an effective party to get things done.
I think what I would say is when I read the news or see the news, it makes me deeply uncomfortable these days, right? It makes me uncomfortable about what's happening to the country that I love, the place that I love, the state that I love. And to me, the way to meet this uncomfortability is to get uncomfortable ourselves. So if you're someone that's come to a meeting and said, I'm gonna make phone calls, but I don't ever wanna knock doors, get uncomfortable and go knock a door. If you are uncomfortable, if you've knocked doors, but you're uncomfortable with the idea of running for office, go talk to Catherine and see what you might be able to run for. I like to stay behind the scenes, that's why I'm not an elected official or a lawyer. It's uncomfortable for me to be up here tonight, but I feel like we're in uncomfortable times, and so we've got to step up a little more. I'm not saying go crazy and do things that are unimaginable to you, but take that extra step, and that one thing that you've always said, that's just not for me. This is the time, this is the moment to make that step.
What I would say is be a bit more courageous. It takes courage to step out and do something uncomfortable. But you have a woman with a plan here. And if it weren't for Richland County Democratic Party helping me knock doors and we work really well together, I would not be up here, as well as the party. We work really well together. So we all need to be on the same page. We need a plan, right? The party does, as well as our caucus and all the things. So work with Catherine and also find where you fit in. Maybe it is knocking doors, maybe it is running for office, but definitely be courageous because now is the time to meet the moment.
Good evening. I tell you, this has been a great forum here. There's my colleagues, as you can see, are very much informed and very much engaged. And I want to say thank you all so much for coming up to Spartanburg. I know, we're not seen as a Columbia or Charleston, but we're getting there. And so we have a lot of good things going on here in the upstate and in the Spartanburg area. And one of the things that we are very intent on is making sure that we pay attention to what's going on in our state and how we can make a difference. And so I just wanted to say hello to everyone and let everybody know that I'm still working. Although you don't see me oftentimes, I'm away at forums and various types of legislative or political events, getting ideas and trying to getting ideas for solving problems here. One of the things that I'm really happy about is that I've just come back from Atlanta for the National Organization of Black Elected Legislative Women. And one of those women that was there in attendance was Nicole Collier. Does anybody know who she is? She is the female that locked herself in the Capitol in Texas when they were attempting to draw the line. So I got a lot of inspiration from her. I get ideas from other people. I'm not so sure that South Carolina is not going to try that since we are what you call a supermajority Republican state. But we're going to be ready for it. And so we're going to take the fight to them. We're also going to take the fight to them in terms of education and abortion and health care. And we'll work together. If anyone has any ideas or would like to speak with me about some proposed legislation or some problem that you'd like for me to look into and address, I'd be more than happy to. Again, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you to our panelists as well.
Earlier I said when we talked about Charleston, we picked a seat that we were going to go try because wins beget more wins, right? Sometimes a win is not an electoral win. It's showing up on someone's doorstep that's never had a Democrat show up before. Sometimes it's going into a community where, because there's no competition, they don't get any direct mail before an election and people just stop voting. So sometimes those wins, sometimes showing up in those places is about making that effort and going and saying, we're going to go knock doors even if it's a district that we're not sure we can win yet. It's about showing up and like we were talking about earlier, these events, going to community events, going to reunions and just saying, we are here. I think one of the things in South Carolina is because we are a majority Republican state, there's this tendency to say, everyone must be a Republican.
Yeah.
And what we know is that there's a lot of there's a lot of Democrats in Spartanburg. And when we are more vocal, when we're more proud, when we wear that on our shoulder, it makes others who are Democrats feel comfortable saying, you know what, maybe I'm going to go out and vote in the Democratic primary. Maybe I'm going to put up a sign for Catherine Harvey. And again, take those steps that they wouldn't have just because someone showed up on their door. So I think it's about being brave and going into places and spaces that we haven't been in a while.
I agree with all that. And the only thing I would add to it is because of the gerrymander, there are parts of this state that are a desert in terms of political competition. And so, you know, like the May seat, the RJ May seat, for those who don't follow this the way maybe some of us do, is in Lexington County. And, you know, sometimes it's as simple as just having somebody to put their name on the ballot and show up and make the argument. And yeah, maybe they get 30% of the vote, okay? But like, one of the problems we see, and the one that most immediately comes to mind is in Charleston County in 2022 when Heather was elected, one of the things we see is there were 5 Democratic House districts down in Charleston County, 3 of which were drawn to be majority black, and so there was almost never any competition. But 2 of them were seats held by white representatives, and what you would see is in the majority black districts where there was no competition, you'd see somewhere between 6,600 and 7,000 people voting in the general election, okay? Then you go look at the 2 seats held by white Democrats, and they had 17 and 18,000 people turning out because there was competition, there was money being spent, there were candidates knocking doors, sending mail, doing TV and all that stuff. And so why do I bring that up? Well, if you're running statewide, or if you're running in Charleston County, and you need to run up our margin in those majority black seats where historically our voters have been, the lack of competition in those seats is just crippling, right? Because like, there's 7,000 people turning out, and we got 17,000 in these majority white districts. And so that competition desert works a real disservice to Democrats, and that is the function of the Republican gerrymander. That's what it's designed to do. It's what it is doing. And so like, what do we do to respond to that? Part of it is recognizing that there's growth. And look, y'all, I mean, white folk moving in from other states, like into suburbs, because their kids want good schools, those should be our people. We should go get those votes, right? So demographic changes, that is one opportunity. And then also just doing the sort of local politics where every race has somebody running, like what y'all are doing here, is critical to sort of build, you know, the larger structure.
If you don't, hopefully you eke out a win the first time. But if you don't give up, because you go from winning 42%, 44%, 48%. I'm not thinking of a specific district, except this is what happened in Charleston and Spencer Wetmore's district. We ran 4 times before she won that seat. Now she's held it for 3 years. All right.
And also, if you don't file, you can't run. And if you don't run, you can't win. So the act of running is an act of winning in so many seats that have gone unchallenged for so long. Every single candidate that ran last year did a service to the candidates running this year. And if we keep this up, we will have a win. Y'all are going to have a win by November 4, 2025. We are going to have more wins. And I'll say this too on the way to the next question. What's happening nationally is a more concentrated effort to defederalize power to the state. What's happening at the state house is a push to get more partisan and more extreme. Your county councils and municipalities are going to be the front lines, which is why Representative Henderson Myers has advocated for a hate crime ordinance, which is why we have to make sure that lower level races are filled with people who are democratically aligned. All of this has a ripple effect. Okay, next question.
I think you hit the nail on the head. The question of sort of what do you do about a voter that doesn't watch the news and isn't as tapped in as the folks in this room? And I think one of the things, we talked about this earlier in the day, is sometimes it's talking about one specific issue that will cut through. And so one of the things I think about, Rep. Garvin and I have talked about this, Heather and I have started talking about, we're talking about it a lot more. But when I think about things that are driving those kinds of folks that might not be watching the news, boy, do I think childcare and housing costs are two that all of a sudden people tune in and they say, oh, I'm paying attention because it hits you in the wallet. And it's something that affects everyone, whether you're living in Spartanburg or whether you're living in Columbia, it doesn't matter. Housing's expensive and childcare is expensive and hard to find. And those are issues that Democrats can and should lead on. And so if they're not watching the news, that's fine. When we show up on their door, that's what we should be talking about.
And I was going to add that my second campaign in particular, we raised close to $300,000 to win re-election in my state house race. We were at people's doors. I talked to majority Republicans. We talked to majority Republicans because guess what? They don't want their bodies legislated either. So it took us going to them and educating them. So a lot of that is on the candidate in the campaign, but also what Catherine's going to be doing, what she's been doing year round, right? It's going to take planting those seeds and like he said, beating the bush on one issue or a couple issues.
Well, just very briefly, I want to answer it a little bit differently. One of the refrains that I hear from people often who don't vote is that, or who vote differently, is that my vote won't matter. They say that over and over again. And I push back against that idea because I say, just look around the world, just look around the nation. Your vote clearly matters when there are troops in Washington, D.C. Your vote clearly matters when there are troops that are headed to Chicago. Your vote clearly matters when immigrants are being sent back to their own countries or other foreign countries. Your vote clearly matters when your health care is being eradicated. Your vote clearly matters when education is being sent back to the states and books are being banned. So there are consequences to elections. And I point to these real consequences because Donald Trump told us what he was going to do, and not enough of us believed him when he said what he was going to do. And so I point to the president and I say to them, if you want a future, if you're concerned about what your county and your city and your state and your country looks like, then you have to be the change that you want to see. You have to get out and vote and not just complain about the problems that exist.
That's good.
I really got involved in politics starting going to rallies. So I'm very much, I'm all for a good rally and signs, people. Because advocacy with policy creates change, right? And so when people show up at the State House for this abortion hearings that we had on October 1st, they're gonna be there, 1,000 plus, I hope. It matters, it really does. Not just for Republicans to show that, there's clear opposition, but to the two, actually I think there's one Democrat on that committee, maybe two, but it shows that you have their back, right? And to me, I can just speak from personal experience, I kept showing up, and I kind of found my path, went through the Emerge program, and then ended up running for office, so I just kept showing up. And I'm very, as maybe hinted upon, but I don't back away from a fight. So I just kept showing up and found my place. So I recommend you do the same.
And I would just say that sometimes, I will say this, I see, when you said it's not through official channels, those are complementary to our efforts, right? I just want to make that clear that I think from the party's perspective, we have to be, part of being the big tent is, there's going to be some folks that want to come and make phone calls, and there's going to be some folks that want to hold a sign and do a protest, and the great part about being a Democrat is we need all of them on the team to move this forward. So I think it's great, and I think that's a great idea.
Growth is happening predominantly, like Brady said, it's predominantly happening on the coast and in the upstate. And also, don't sleep on parts like the Old English District, right? Lancaster and York, sort of as the people want to be close to Charlotte, but not pay North Carolina taxes. So that's kind of geographically where it is. I think of it in sort of three buckets. There's the retiree community, which may be the toughest, but I would encourage us not to sleep on those folks because they're coming from someplace else where even if they were Republicans in that other state, they probably were not the same type of Republicans that we have here. So don't sleep on those older folks that are coming down to retire. And that really, if you think about Beaufort County, that's where, okay. Then you have the folks who they want their kids in good schools. They live in suburbs, they've got children to raise, they want excellent public education. And that's where I think of the upstate, the Old English District, and people raising children, worried about schools, worried about childcare, worried about cost of living. Oh my gosh, that's the Democratic sweet spot, right? That should be home base for us. Great study just got released. 4 out of 10 South Carolinians can't meet basic needs, right? Housing, healthcare, education. And these are not people below the poverty line. These are people who just can't pay the bills. That's 4 out of 10 people in this room, right? Okay, those ought to be our people. We gotta go find them and talk to them. The other third category I would mention, that is the fastest growing category of a demographic category is white people. The second fastest is Hispanic voters. And historically in South Carolina, we predominantly in terms of politics and demographics, it's been about white folks and black folks, okay? But that Hispanic population is growing and growing fast, and I am not aware, I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I'm not aware of anywhere that has done, anywhere or anyone that has done a super effective job of engaging that community, organizing them in an effective way. And so when you think about that growth as putting together a coalition that would let a candidate get to 50% plus one, right? Hispanic voters in Spartanburg, Saluda County, Lexington County, I'm probably leaving a couple Dorchester County, that Hispanic population cobbled together with some black folks, cobbled together with some white folks, man, that starts to look like a real like, electoral coalition that can win, right? So those are the ways I think about the demographic growth.
I just had a couple of brief comments. I think, Chris, you alluded to the fact that the black voter turnout was low. Don't blame it on us. We're not the majority here. The other point I want to make is that you also talked about, I don't remember exactly what you said, but you mentioned a district that had like 7,000 black voters and another district had 17,000 voters. There needs to be, in my opinion, more appeal to that district where we are, that the numbers are low. Apparently, you know, as someone said here, you may not be getting to enough of us to help out in this disparities. Yeah, I think that's it. Thank you.
And let me just react briefly. So I agree with you 100%. And please don't misunderstand what I was saying earlier. I'm not blaming black voters. What I'm saying is there is a phenomenon happening in this state where, for whatever reason, this group that has been a reliable and strong part of our coalition is pulling back from the political process. And when people do that, my personal belief about what's happening is they're looking around saying, this politics thing ain't working for me anymore. And so the response to that is actually on us to find ways to go re-engage and find ways to create outcomes that those voters care about to bring them back into the process. And so that's my concern, is that when you have such a dramatic shift, to me, it's a sign that something's not working on the candidate and party side.
Yeah, because the attitude is that the Democrats don't care anymore for our community than the Republicans.
Right. That's the concern. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please give this excellent panel a round of applause. And thank you all for staying along. I also want to shout out Etta, our youngest Democrat who joined us tonight.